For most of our relationship, Anna and I were the couple everyone admired. Friends would tease us, saying we were that couple. The ones who seemed perfectly in sync, the ones who always had each other's backs. I loved her with everything I had, and until recently, I thought she felt the same. We'd been together for almost 4 years, and things were serious. We talked about marriage, kids, and even moving out of the city to build a life together. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was my future. Or at least that's what I believed. Anna was open about her life and so was I. She had this childhood friend, Michael, who came up in conversation from time to time. She called him her partner in crime growing up, someone who had been there for all her major milestones. Honestly, I didn't think much of him. They hadn't seen each other in years, and while she spoke fondly of him, it never felt like a threat. But as time went on, little things started to change. It wasn't anything big at first, just small things I noticed about her mood. She started canceling our plans occasionally, claiming she was too tired after work or had things to catch up on. Anna had always been busy, but she used to light up when we spent time together. Now it felt like she was pulling away. I chalked it up to stress. She worked a demanding job, and planning a future together isn't exactly a walk in the park. I tried to be supportive, to give her space, but the distance between us didn't close. One night, while we were watching TV, she brought up Michael for the first time in a while. "Did I ever tell you that Michael got into photography?" she asked, her voice casual but her eyes lighting up as she spoke. "Maybe," I said, not really paying attention. "Yeah, he's so talented," she continued, scrolling through her phone. "He takes these incredible shots of the city. I'll have to show you sometime." I smiled, but something about the way she spoke made me pause. It wasn't what she said, it was the tone. It had a softness I hadn't heard in a while. I told myself it didn't mean anything. After all, he was just a friend. Still, that was the first moment I felt something shift. I couldn't explain it, but deep down, something about the mention of Michael didn't sit right with me. After that night, the name Michael started to come up more often. It wasn't constant, but enough to notice. She'd slip him into casual conversations, like when we were driving to dinner or unwinding after work. Michael always used to say the same thing. She laughed one evening when I joked about my clumsiness. It wasn't an unusual comment, but the way she said his name lingered in my head long after the moment had passed. At first, I dismissed it. He was just a friend. It wasn't like they were meeting up or anything. Still, my mind would replay those moments, overanalyzing the smallest details. I couldn't shake the thought that something felt off. Then, she started acting differently in other ways. Anna had always been open and transparent with me. We shared passwords, left our phones lying around without a second thought. It was just how we were. But one day, as she was texting on the couch, I noticed her turn her phone slightly away from me. It was subtle, barely a movement, but enough to make my stomach tighten. "Who's that?" I asked casually. She glanced up, a little too quickly. "Just a coworker," she said, her tone light. I nodded, trying not to overthink it. "Anything interesting?" "No, not really," she replied, locking her phone and putting it down face down on the table. That was the first time she'd ever done that. Again, I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe she just wanted privacy. It wasn't like I had any reason not to trust her. But once the idea planted itself in my mind, it was hard to ignore. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us seemed to grow. She started staying late at work more often. When I asked about it, she'd sigh and say something about tight deadlines or last-minute meetings. "Don't wait up for me tonight," she said one Friday as she grabbed her bag. "Another late one?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my gaze. "It's been a crazy week." I kissed her on the cheek and told her to take care, but the unease in my chest didn't go away. That night, as I sat alone in our apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the changes I'd noticed. Her phone was always locked away, her stories about work seemed vague, and she was mentioning Michael more often than ever. I told myself I was being paranoid. There was no evidence of anything wrong. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away from me. It wasn't until the following weekend that things took a sharper turn. We had plans to spend the day together, a rare opportunity with her busy schedule. But that morning, she got a call and immediately stepped out of the room to answer it. When she came back, she looked flustered. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said quickly. "That was my mom. She needs some help with a few things, so I'll have to head over there for a bit." I frowned. "I thought we were spending the day together?" "I know," she said, avoiding my eyes. "I'll just be a couple of hours, I promise." Reluctantly, I agreed, though something about her story didn't sit right with me. When she left, I found myself pacing the apartment, trying to make sense of everything. The phone calls, the late nights, the way she mentioned Michael. It all added up to nothing concrete, but my instincts were screaming at me. And for the first time, I wondered if I could really trust Anna. The unease I'd been carrying around for weeks finally became too heavy to ignore. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't relax at home. Every spare moment was consumed by doubts about Anna. It was like a loop playing in my mind. The phone calls, the late nights, the way her eyes lit up whenever she mentioned Michael. I knew I needed to stop overthinking and start acting. If I was wrong, I'd feel like an idiot, but if I was right, I didn't even want to consider what that meant. The opportunity to test my suspicions came sooner than I expected. One Wednesday afternoon, Anna called me to let me know she'd be working late again. "Don't wait up," she said casually, her tone a little too cheerful. "All right?" I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Hope it's not too stressful." "It won't be," she said. "Just a lot to get through." When she hung up, I stared at my phone, debating whether I should let it go or finally take matters into my own hands. A part of me felt guilty even considering it, but another part, the louder part, reminded me that I needed clarity. I couldn't keep living with this constant doubt. So I decided to follow her. I left work early, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well, and parked a few blocks away from her office. I waited, heart pounding, as the minutes stretched into an hour. Just when I started questioning myself, I saw her. She stepped out of the building, not looking stressed or rushed as she had claimed. Instead, she looked happy. I watched as she crossed the street and entered a small cafe. At first, I thought maybe she was just grabbing a coffee before heading back to work. But then I saw him, Michael. He was already seated at a corner table, and when Anna walked in, his face lit up in a way that made my stomach churn. She smiled back, the kind of smile she used to give me. They hugged, a little too long for comfort, and then sat down across from each other. For the next 20 minutes, I sat frozen in my car, watching them through the cafe window. Their body language told me everything I needed to know. They leaned in close as they talked, their laughter filling the space between them. At one point, she reached across the table and touched his hand, a gesture so intimate it made my chest tighten. This wasn't a work meeting. This wasn't two old friends catching up. This was something else entirely. I wanted to storm in there and demand an explanation, but I stopped myself. I needed to process what I was seeing, to think about how to confront her without letting my emotions take over. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of them through the window, proof that I wasn't imagining things. That evening, when Anna came home, I was waiting for her in the living room. "You're home early," she said, setting her bag down. "Everything okay?" I nodded, my jaw tight. "We need to talk." She froze for a moment, then sat down across from me, her expression wary. "What's wrong?" "I saw you today," I said, my voice steady but cold, "at the cafe. With Michael." Her eyes widened, and for a split second, she looked genuinely panicked. But she recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. "You followed me? Seriously? That's ridiculous." "Don't deflect," I snapped, holding up my phone and showing her the photo. "Explain this." Her face drained of color as she stared at the screen. "It's not what it looks like," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Then tell me," I said, my patience wearing thin. "What exactly does it look like?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Michael and I are just friends," she began, her voice shaky. "We were catching up, that's all. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react like this." React like what? I shot back, my voice rising. Like someone who deserves to know why their fiancé is sneaking around with another man? It wasn't sneaking, she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. I swear, there's nothing going on between us. You're being paranoid. Her words might have sounded convincing to someone else, but I knew her too well. The way she avoided my gaze, the way her hands fidgeted nervously, it was clear she was hiding something. I can't do this, Anna, I said finally, my voice breaking. I can't be with someone I can't trust. Her eyes widened, and she reached for my hand. No, please, she begged. Don't say that. I love you. This was nothing, just a stupid mistake. Please don't throw everything away over a misunderstanding. I pulled my hand back, standing up and pacing the room. A misunderstanding? I repeated bitterly. You've been lying to me, Anna. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? She stood too, her tears flowing freely now. I'll stop seeing him, she promised. I'll cut him out of my life. Just don't end this. Don't end us. Her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, I almost believed her. But the damage had been done. I need time to think, I said finally, walking out of the room before I could change my mind. As I closed the door behind me, I felt like my world was falling apart. The days following that confrontation were some of the hardest of my life. Anna and I barely spoke, and the air in our apartment felt thick with tension. She tried to bridge the gap, leaving little notes for me on the kitchen counter, texting me at work to ask how I was doing, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every time I looked at her, I saw that cafe, that smile, and the way she touched Michael's hand like I didn't even exist. But despite my anger, I couldn't bring myself to leave. I told myself I needed time to think, but the truth was, I didn't want to throw away everything we'd built without being absolutely sure. I loved Anna. Despite everything, I still loved her. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to fix this. One evening, after another long day of avoiding each other, she finally cornered me in the kitchen. We can't keep doing this, she said softly, her eyes red from crying. Please talk to me. Yell at me. Scream at me if you have to. But don't shut me out like this. I sighed, leaning against the counter. I don't know what you want me to say, Anna. You broke my trust. How do we come back from that? I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice trembling. I'll stop talking to Michael, block him, delete his number, anything you need. Just give me a chance to make this right. Blocking his number won't erase what you did. I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. You lied to me. You hid things from me. How am I supposed to believe you now? She flinched but didn't back down. You're right, she admitted. I messed up, and I can't take that back. But I swear it wasn't what you think. Michael, he's been going through a tough time, and I thought I was helping him. I didn't realize how much it was hurting us until it was too late. Her words caught me off guard. For the first time, she sounded genuinely remorseful, not defensive. I didn't want to lose you, she continued, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't know how to tell you about Michael without making you think the worst. So I kept it from you, and that was wrong. I see that now. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But the memory of that day at the cafe still loomed large in my mind. I don't know if I can forgive this, I said quietly. Even if you didn't cheat, you crossed a line, Anna. And you let me sit here, doubting myself, doubting everything, while you kept him a secret. I'll prove it to you, she said desperately, stepping closer. I'll earn your trust back. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. Just don't give up on us. I looked into her eyes, searching for some sign that this wasn't all just empty promises. She looked so broken, so raw, that for a moment, I saw the woman I fell in love with again. Fine, I said after a long pause. We'll try. But this is on you, Anna. If we're going to make this work, you have to be completely honest with me from now on. No more secrets. She nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. I promise, she said. No more secrets. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Anna worked hard to rebuild what we'd lost. She deleted Michael's number in front of me, showed me the messages she sent cutting him off, and even offered to let me check her phone anytime I wanted. At first, it felt strange, like we were tiptoeing around each other, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. But slowly, things began to shift. We started talking again, really talking about everything we'd been holding back. I told her about my doubts and insecurities, how her behavior made me feel like I wasn't enough. She told me about her own struggles, how she felt overwhelmed by the wedding planning and guilty for keeping things from me. It wasn't easy. Some days it felt like we were moving forward, and other days it felt like we were stuck in the same place. But through it all, we kept trying. Because deep down, we both wanted the same thing, to save what we had. As the weeks went by, Anna kept her promise. She showed me every effort she was making to rebuild my trust. She no longer kept her phone glued to her side or turned face down. She would text me throughout the day to check in, and when she stayed late at work, she called me beforehand to let me know why. At first, I thought these gestures might feel forced, like she was doing them out of guilt or fear. But over time, they began to feel genuine. Slowly, I started to let my guard down. One evening, she suggested we go out for dinner, something we hadn't done in what felt like ages. I hesitated at first, but she looked so hopeful, so eager to reconnect, that I couldn't say no. We went to our favorite Italian restaurant, the one where we used to spend hours laughing over shared plates of pasta and sipping cheap wine. As we sat down, I could see her trying to find her way back to that version of us. The version that felt effortless, happy, and safe. The conversation started light, with small talk about work and our friends. But eventually, the topic of Michael came up again, hanging between us like a storm cloud. "I know we said no more secrets," she began, her voice soft but steady. "So I want to be honest with you about something." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "I reached out to Michael," she admitted, her eyes darting to mine. "Just once, to make it clear that things were over and that I needed to focus on us." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice calm. "When did this happen?" "About a week ago," she said. "I didn't want to hide it from you, but I needed to handle it myself first." "And what did he say?" She sighed, looking down at her hands. "He didn't take it well. He accused me of letting you control me, of overreacting. But I told him that this wasn't about you or him. It was about me doing what's right for our relationship. I blocked him after that." I studied her face, searching for any hint of dishonesty, but all I saw was vulnerability. "You should have told me sooner," I said finally. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't want to risk upsetting you before I had the chance to fix things." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry that she had reached out to him at all, but another part of me appreciated her honesty. She could have kept it from me, but she didn't. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath. "I believe you, but this has to be the last time. No more contact with him, ever." She nodded quickly, relief flooding her expression. "I promise. No more." That night, as we walked home from the restaurant, hand in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But rebuilding trust wasn't just about what Anna did, it was about me too. I couldn't expect her to do all the work while I held onto my anger like a shield. If we were going to move forward, I needed to meet her halfway. So, I started opening up again, letting her see the parts of me I'd walled off after everything happened. I told her how hurt I'd been, how her actions made me question not just her, but myself. "I felt like I wasn't enough for you," I admitted one night as we sat on the couch, our legs tangled together, "like I was failing as a partner." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You were never the problem," she said. "I was scared. Scared of losing you, scared of screwing things up. And instead of dealing with that, I made things worse." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been focused on my own pain that I hadn't considered hers. "It's not going to be easy," I said, "for either of us. But I want to try." "Me too," she said, squeezing my hand. "More than anything." And for the first time, I believed her. The next 2 years were some of the hardest, yet most transformative of our lives. After the Michael incident, Anna and I found ourselves standing on a fragile bridge, one we had to rebuild brick by brick. Some days it felt impossible, like every step forward was met with an avalanche of doubts and unspoken fears. But other days we glimpsed the possibility of what we could be again. At first, things were awkward. Every conversation felt heavy, like we were both tiptoeing around a minefield. Trust is a funny thing. It takes years to build but can crumble in seconds. Rebuilding it required more than just promises. It demanded actions. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. Patience, and a willingness to face the uncomfortable truth of how we ended up there. Anna threw herself into proving her commitment to us. She became more open, more present, and more attuned to my needs. Every late night at work came with a text or call. Every outing with friends was discussed openly, with no room for secrecy. She even suggested couples therapy, something I initially resisted out of pride but later agreed to. Therapy turned out to be a game changer. At first, I dreaded those sessions. Sitting across from a stranger, laying bare all the cracks in our relationship, felt unnatural and invasive. But our therapist had a way of cutting through the noise, helping us see what was really at the heart of our struggles. "I don't think you're just rebuilding trust in Anna," she said to me during one session. "I think you're rebuilding trust in yourself. Your ability to recognize red flags, to feel secure in your relationship, to know that you're enough." That hit me hard. She was right. I wasn't just angry at Anna. I was angry at myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for letting things spiral out of control. For Anna, therapy gave her a space to unpack her own guilt and fears. She admitted how much she struggled with the pressure of our relationship, the expectations of marriage, the weight of her past, and her own insecurities. "I didn't reach out to Michael because I wanted something more," she confessed one day. "I reached out because I was scared of losing what I already had. But instead of talking to you about it, I made the worst decision of my life." Hearing her say those words wasn't easy, but it was a step toward healing. Over time, the tension in our home began to ease. We started finding joy in the little things again. Cooking dinner together, watching our favorite shows, even just sitting in silence, enjoying each other's presence. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Anna's actions spoke louder than her words. She went out of her way to show me she was committed, not just to me, but to us. She organized weekend getaways, planned surprise date nights, and even started joining me in my hobbies like hiking and photography. And I worked on myself too. I stopped using the past as a weapon in our arguments. I stopped letting my doubts cloud every moment of our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when the memory of that cafe haunted me, but I was learning to let go. A year after the incident, we found ourselves sitting in the same cafe where I'd first seen her with Michael. It wasn't planned. We'd stumbled upon it while walking through the city. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I could step inside. Anna noticed and took my hand. "Let's make a new memory here," she said softly. So we did. We sat at a corner table, ordered coffee and pastries, and talked for hours. By the time we left, the weight of that place no longer felt unbearable. By the time we hit the 2-year mark, things felt normal again. Not perfect, relationships never are, but stable. The shadow of Michael no longer loomed over us. We talked openly about our fears and insecurities, and we made a conscious effort to prioritize each other. I won't lie and say everything was magically fixed. There were still moments when the past crept in, uninvited and unwelcome. But those moments became fewer and farther between. On our second anniversary post-incident, I found myself looking at Anna and realizing something important. We'd been through hell, but we'd come out stronger. "Thank you," I said to her that night as we sat on the couch, watching the sunset through our living room window. "For what?" she asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "For not giving up," I said. "For fighting for us." She smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You fought too." We both did. And she was right. We'd fought for each other, for our future, for the love that had once seemed unbreakable. And now it felt like we were finally getting back to the place we were always meant to be. By the time our relationship had fully stabilized, something had shifted in me. The doubts that once consumed me had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that Anna and I had weathered a storm together. We had fought for each other, rebuilt the foundation of our trust, and come out stronger. It was a kind of bond one hadn't fully appreciated before, but now I couldn't imagine life without her. That realization planted a seed in my mind. I started thinking about our future in a way I hadn't for years. I thought about waking up next to her every morning, building a life together, and maybe even starting a family someday. The idea wasn't new, but now it felt clearer, more urgent. One evening, as we sat on the couch with takeout boxes scattered around us, I couldn't help but smile at how natural everything felt. Anna caught me staring and tilted her head with a playful grin. "What's that look for?" she asked, nudging me with her foot. "Just thinking," I said, shrugging. "About what?" "About how lucky I am," I replied, my voice soft but sincere. She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the blush that crept into her cheeks. "You're such a sap," she teased, but her smile lingered. That was the moment I decided. I wanted to marry her. The next few weeks were a blur of planning. I picked out a ring, consulted her closest friend to make sure it was perfect, and spent more time than I'd like to admit rehearsing what I'd say. I didn't want to overcomplicate things, we'd already been through so much. I just wanted the proposal to feel genuine, like us. The night finally came on a crisp autumn evening. I took Anna to a quiet park where we'd had one of our first dates. The trees were glowing with golden leaves, and the air smelled faintly of pine. As we walked along the path, I stopped by a bench overlooking the small lake. Anna looked at me curiously as I fidgeted with my jacket pocket. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, my heart pounding. I need to ask you something." She raised an eyebrow but didn't say a word. Taking a deep breath, I dropped to one knee and pulled out the ring. "Anna, I know we've been through a lot, more than most couples ever have to face, but you've shown me what love really means. You've stood by me even when it wasn't easy, and I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else. Will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, she didn't speak, and I felt my stomach twist with nervous anticipation. Then she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Of course, yes." The relief and joy that washed over me in that moment were indescribable. As I slid the ring onto her finger and she threw her arms around me, everything else faded away. It was just us, together, promising forever. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement. We announced our engagement to our families and friends, who were overjoyed for us. My parents immediately started offering to help with the wedding, while Anna's mom burst into tears when she saw the ring. We decided to keep the wedding small and intimate, just close family and friends. Neither of us wanted the stress of a massive event, especially after everything we'd been through. "We'll do it in 6 months," Anna suggested one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, brainstorming ideas. 6 months sounds perfect," I agreed. We picked a charming countryside venue surrounded by lush greenery, the kind of place that felt both magical and personal. Anna wanted a spring wedding, with wildflowers and soft pastel colors, while I focused on making sure the food and music were exactly what we both loved. "I want it to feel like us," Anna said as we finalized the guest list. "It will," I promised. As the weeks went on, we worked together to plan every detail. From the simple white invitations to the playlist for the reception, every choice felt like a reflection of how far we'd come. We were finally on the same page again, building something beautiful together. By the time everything was set, the anticipation was almost unbearable. In 6 short months, we'd be husband and wife. It felt like a dream, a second chance at the life we both wanted. 3 months into our wedding planning, everything seemed to be falling into place. We'd found the perfect venue, a large, rustic house in the countryside surrounded by rolling hills and blooming meadows. It was spacious enough to host our closest family and friends, yet cozy enough to feel intimate. Anna fell in love with it the moment we stepped inside. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with excitement as we wandered through the airy rooms. "I can already picture it. The flowers, the tables, the lights strung up outside. I couldn't help but smile. Her joy was infectious, and seeing her so happy made all the stress of planning feel worth it. We booked the house for an entire weekend so we could celebrate without rushing. The plan was to have the ceremony outdoors, with the reception spilling into the garden and patio area. We even found a charming little guest house nearby for anyone who didn't want to drive home afterward. Felt like everything was falling into place. But then, things started to change. At first, it was subtle little shifts in Anna's behavior that I chalked up to pre-wedding jitters. She started coming home later than usual, claiming she was swamped at work. It's just this big project. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference, she explained one night as I set the table for dinner. Once it's over, things will go back to normal. I wanted to believe her, so I didn't push. After all, weddings could be stressful, and her job had always been demanding. But as the weeks went by, her late nights became more frequent. Then there were the weekends. One Saturday morning, as we were sipping coffee, Anna announced that she needed to visit her parents. "Mom needs help with some paperwork," she said, avoiding my gaze. "It's nothing major, but she asked if I could come by." I raised an eyebrow. "Can't it wait? We were supposed to finalize the seating chart today." "I know," she said quickly, setting her mug down. "But this is important. I'll only be gone for a few hours." I nodded, though something about her tone didn't sit right with me. That afternoon, as I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at our half-finished chart, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Anna had always been close to her parents, but these visits were becoming more frequent and more last-minute. The pattern continued over the next few weeks. There was always some reason, work, family, errands, that pulled her away. When she was home, she seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. One evening, as we were watching TV, I turned to her and asked, "Is everything okay?" She looked at me, startled. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know," I said carefully. "You've just seemed distant lately." Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "I'm just tired, that's all. With work and the wedding, it's a lot." I nodded, though her answer didn't entirely convince me. The final straw came one weekend when she told me she had to leave early Saturday morning to help her mom again. As she packed her bag, I couldn't help but notice how nervous she seemed. Her movements rushed, her responses clipped. "Do you want me to come with you?" I offered, trying to keep my tone light. "No," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "It's just something I need to handle on my own." I stood there, watching her leave, a knot forming in my stomach. For the first time in months, I felt that old, familiar doubt creeping back in. And this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The day of our wedding finally arrived, and the countryside house looked like something out of a dream. The ceremony had been flawless. The sun was shining, the flowers we'd chosen were in full bloom, and Anna looked breathtaking in her gown. For a few brief, perfect hours, all my doubts, all my lingering concerns, melted away. This was the moment we had fought for, the culmination of 2 years of hard work, tears, and forgiveness. The reception was just as magical. Strings of fairy lights twinkled in the garden. The sound of laughter and music filled the air, and our friends and family seemed genuinely happy for us. Anna was radiant, moving from guest to guest with her trademark warmth and charm. I couldn't help but feel proud to call her my wife. But then, something happened that unsettled me. As we were greeting guests, I noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Michael. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. We hadn't invited him. In fact, we had explicitly agreed not to. Anna had said it was better to keep things simple and avoid any unnecessary drama. Yet there he was, standing near the bar, holding a drink and chatting casually with some of our friends. I turned to Anna, who was busy laughing with her bridesmaids. She hadn't mentioned anything about him coming. Was this a last-minute decision? A misunderstanding? Or had she invited him without telling me? "Hey," I said, gently taking her arm. "Michael's here." She glanced over, her expression unreadable. "Oh," she said after a moment. I guess someone must have mentioned the wedding to him. That doesn't explain why he's here, I said, my voice low. Anna hesitated, then shrugged. It's fine. He's just a friend. Let's not make a scene. Her response didn't sit right with me, but I decided to let it go for the sake of the evening. The last thing I wanted was to ruin our wedding day over something that might have been innocent. The night wore on, and the party shifted into full swing. People were dancing, laughing, and drinking. I tried to enjoy myself, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Every time I glanced around, I seemed to catch Michael and Anna in brief moments. Talking, laughing, sharing looks that felt too familiar. By midnight, most of the older guests had left, and the party was winding down. I noticed Anna was no longer on the dance floor. Figuring she might have slipped away for a moment of quiet or to freshen up, I decided to check on her. I made my way through the house, calling her name softly so as not to disturb anyone. The place was quiet, the hum of the party fading into the background. As I climbed the stairs to the master suite, a strange unease settled over me. When I reached our bedroom door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. The light inside was dim, and I could hear faint rustling noises. Anna, I called, stepping inside. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Anna was there, lying on the bed, completely naked, and she wasn't alone. Michael was beside her, his shirt off, his hands on her as if this was the most natural thing in the world. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. My heart pounded in my chest, the blood rushing to my ears. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, that my fears had conjured this horrifying scene. But the way they both froze when they noticed me, their wide eyes filled with shock and guilt, told me this was all too real. Are you kidding me? I finally managed to choke out, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Anna scrambled to cover herself with the sheets, her face pale as a ghost. This isn't, she stammered, her words tripping over themselves. Michael didn't say a word. He just grabbed his shirt and bolted past me, avoiding my gaze as he disappeared down the hallway. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on Anna. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, her hands clutching the sheets to her chest. I can explain, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Explain, I snapped, my voice rising. You're in our bed with him, on our wedding night. Her tears turned into sobs, but I couldn't bring myself to feel pity for her. The image of them together, the betrayal, was seared into my mind. How long? I demanded, my fists clenched. How long has this been going on? She shook her head, unable to answer. Was it before the wedding? I pressed, my voice breaking. Was it during all those late nights and visits to your parents? Please, she begged, her voice shaking. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Stop, I said, cutting her off. Just stop. I couldn't listen to another word. Without another glance, I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My mind was racing, my heart shattering with every step I took. Downstairs, the remnants of the party continued. But for me, the night was over. So was everything I thought I knew about Anna. The morning after our wedding, the day that was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, was instead the beginning of the end. I barely slept that night. I spent the hours until dawn pacing the living room, my mind swirling with anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. The house, which had been filled with joy and laughter just hours earlier, now felt like a hollow shell. Anna didn't come downstairs. At some point, I heard the faint sound of her crying from behind the closed door of the bedroom, but I didn't care. I had nothing left to say to her. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, I made my decision. I couldn't stay in this marriage, not after what she'd done. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. By 8 a.m., I was on the phone with a divorce lawyer. My father, who had been staying nearby with my mother, arrived at the house shortly after I called him. The moment I saw him, the floodgates opened. I told him everything. What I had seen, how long I had suspected, and how shattered I felt. He listened silently, his expression a mixture of anger and sadness. When I finished, he put a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing calling me," he said. "We'll handle this. You don't have to face it alone." With my parents' support, I called Anna down. She emerged from the bedroom looking pale and disheveled, her eyes red from crying. She didn't say much, just sat across from me at the dining table, avoiding my gaze as I laid out what needed to happen next. "I want a divorce," I said bluntly. My voice was calm, but every word felt like a knife in my throat. She nodded, fresh tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. "There's nothing left to say. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference." I continued. "I'll pack my things and leave today. My lawyer will contact you about the rest." "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let me explain." "No," I interrupted sharply. "You don't get to explain. You made your choice, Anna. Now I'm making mine." She broke down into sobs, but I didn't stay to comfort her. Couldn't. By noon, I had moved back into my parents' house. The legal process began immediately, and word of what had happened spread through our small town like wildfire. At first, Anna tried to keep a low profile, but in a town like ours, secrets don't stay buried for long. People began talking, whispers at the grocery store, quiet conversations at the cafe. Everyone knew about Michael, about what she had done on our wedding night. The backlash was swift and brutal. Anna's friends, many of whom had stood by her for years, stopped returning her calls. Her co-workers began keeping their distance. Even her family seemed unsure how to deal with the fallout. Her mother, who had always adored me, called to apologize on Anna's behalf, but there was little she could say to undo the damage. Michael didn't fare much better. He became the subject of public ridicule, his name synonymous with betrayal. He eventually left town, unable to face the constant judgment and stares. But for Anna, there was no escape. Everywhere she went, she was met with icy glares and whispered insults. She tried to apologize to me several times, through messages, letters, even showing up at my parents' house, but I refused to see her. I focused on rebuilding my life. I poured myself into work, leaned on my family and close friends for support, and eventually began to heal. It wasn't easy, and the scars of that night will likely stay with me forever. But I knew one thing for certain: I deserved better. Anna's betrayal didn't just end our marriage. It shattered the image I had of her, of us, of the life we were supposed to have. But in the end, it also taught me something important. I learned to trust my instincts. I learned to value myself. And most of all, I learned that even the deepest wounds can heal with time. As for Anna, I don't know what became of her. The last I heard, she had moved away to start over somewhere new. And while a part of me will always remember the good times we shared, the woman I loved no longer exists in my mind. She made her choice and I made mine. And now I'm finally free to move on. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference.